Toda. Thank you very much. We've learned a lot about the options open for Jewish education, from the Hochschule and rabbinic training to the kindergarten in Germany today. And now the floor is open to questions, and we have some discussion.
I think as far as I understood it, it was a question directed at the how the immigrants are introduced to the German. Right. I think that since most of them go to the usual German schools, and this is exposed to a large extent in the curriculum, they're quite aware of the what went on in the Holocaust. And on the other hand, I mean, to say it quite drastically, these people came to Germany because they thought at the time at least, that this is the land where milk and honey flows. Because for them, that was an immense step economically to at least ensure for their children that they have a far better future than they thought they would have in the former Soviet Union. Now, one can also say that some of the people in the second generation have since gone back to Russia because economically Russia was also not so bad. So that has not meant that people will stay for good in the German setup, as we have also heard from some of the lectures.
No, I think...
Well, German pupils also get exposed to that, to the historic facts in a big way. So, I mean, you know, there is no ignorance about what went on in the Nazi period. It is a very large part of the, not only the training at schools, but also in the public sphere by monuments or the stepping stones. Or if you go through Berlin as a capital, I would say, I mean, say this now as a Jew, that is a capital that is plastered with memorials, what went on where and when, and it's certainly not hidden in any way.
Your first. If I may answer your questions, if I start to answer your questions, to your first question, in our session yesterday in the late afternoon, we have heard by Mr. Rensman that the general trends on hate crimes or anti-Semitism, Germany is anywhere in the middle. It is not steadily increased. That's wrong. So I don't know, maybe the media makes a picture that sometimes will exaggerate these events. Of course, there are some terrible events. We had this in summer. We had the circumcision debate. We had the attack on Rabbi Daniel Alter and some other very bad situations. But I think this does not affect the communities in any way to stop their optimistic projects to build up more educational institutions and to do everything to make the Jewish communities more flourishing. And to your second question about the Russians, the future of the Jewish communities in connection with the Russians, the Russian Jewish immigrants, or let's say that people who became member of the Jewish communities and have a background from the former Soviet Union, they are about 90% now, but everything, I think, will stand and fall now with the second generation of the young generation from the families from the former Soviet Union. And that's why all these attempts and efforts like the Ernst Ludwig Ehrlich Studienwerk and the rabbinical training, but also the general training in Jewish adult centers, just to impart a wider knowledge on Jewish history and tradition. It's 5 before 12. It's the time is flying by. If the second generation of the Russian Jews will not be attracted for the communities, we might have empty synagogues in 50 years or in 20 years.
Does it work? Hello? Hello? Okay, I have a question about the educational authorities, about the institution, also like the kind of financial. So because there has been this debate when like some articles come off of the law freedom of education, and critical outside saying, okay, Germany just want non-Jewish Jews. So I was wondering if you want you to be like the defenders of the German state, and that almost all the Jewish institutions are dependent on this.
Well, you know, I wish I had a worse problem. At least that way we can fund the institutions. All of Jewish life is dependent on this kind of support, simply because there are two ways of funding synagogues in Germany. Number one, that's your church tax, which is a certain percentage on top of your income tax, which is automatically deducted by the government and given to your faith denomination to which you belong. But from this chunk of income, you couldn't run the Jewish community system as it is, as you have so kindly described it, because most of the members of Jewish communities are on social benefit, and therefore they don't pay income tax, and then they don't pay church tax. So, for example, alone in the Berlin congregation, and correct me if I'm wrong, for something like 8 to 9,000 members. There is a state subsidy of 15 million, 25 million euro annually just for that Berlin congregation. But that is for 5 synagogues, for a primary school, for a secondary school, and all kinds of other things with 400 employees. So I would say that's probably better funded than any North American Jewish institution. And I don't think that this structure can be surplaced by anything else. In the last 15 years, we have seen a fight of non-Orthodox denominations to get into this funding structure. We should never forget that this funding structure is held by the Orthodox. Therefore, the attempt to claim by the Lauder Foundation that the money was only available for non-Orthodox assimilationist activities is really quite ridiculous, because if the Zentralrat der Juden in Deutschland would find the work of the Lauder Foundation so helpful, with 10 million euro annually, they can easily find money to support rabbinic training. But I've shown you in my chart that from the money that the Zentralrat receives, which is 10 million euro at the moment, only 600,000 euro go into rabbinical training for all streams, and therefore one can see that that's not a priority of the Jewish community as it stands. The problem that the Orthodox rabbinical training faces is that it cannot claim or apply for funding from the higher education budget because it simply is not an academic training. If it had a degree program, it could get that kind of funding, but as it happens, and that's probably different from the Hildesheimer approach pre-war, current Orthodox rabbis do not seek an academic qualification, and then they should not moan about not getting money from the university budget.
There are some. Yeah. I think the second generation is not yet enough explored, but there have been some empirical studies on the religiosity of Russian Jews to Germany, and I think to Israel and the United States is almost the same. It is estimated that about 10% of the immigrants return to become a religious person. But I think it would be too simple to assign them to one of the congregations, because you have young Russian students who become a rabbi at the Abraham Geiger College. You have them at the rabbinical seminar in Berlin, and you find them in all kind of groups and orientations in this new and nice pluralism in Germany. You have committed Russians in all of these groups, but 10%, if you focus just on real deep religiosity, it's 1/10 until now.
I can add to that an experience from a rank-and-file congregation that is Bamberg. Bamberg has currently, I think, about 1,000 members. When a friend of mine took it over as a chairman, it was almost empty. He really thought that the last task he would be doing is closing the cemetery door, and then the wall came down. Most of the people who immigrated had to join a Jewish community in order to get to the social benefits. We built up a huge support system to get them jobs, to get them at least housing, and to sustain them with the most basic needs. As soon as they realize that they actually pay income tax and need to then pay the church tax, people then decide to leave the Jewish community very often, because they don't really think that they need to contribute. So the fact is, and I mean, this friend of mine said he can be lucky if in 10 years' time 3% of those that came and those that he took care of are actually still involved in Jewish community life. That was a very pessimistic view. Since I do the Ernst Ludwig Ehrlich Scholarship Foundation, I have a much more optimistic view. But it is a bit like anybody who comes from the desert and suddenly finds himself, herself in a supermarket. And there are lots of offers, and there are lots of things that you have to worry about if you change your country. Believe me, Russia and Germany is quite different, and people have to probably totally re-educate themselves in order to be able to operate in this new society. Therefore, the second generation is what I put my sort of emphasis on. And here there is a lot of interest from a admittedly, from a low basis of knowledge, but there is an experimental sense. People are open-minded and they are actually looking for something. So the current situation is, I think, well described by saying there are 10% on the left side and 10% on the right side at most who can engage Russians in Orthodox or non-Orthodox causes, and there is a huge vacuum in the middle which we both can conquer, which is why I say the Orthodoxy is absolutely not a competition for me. There's so many fish in the pond that for everybody there is enough if one tries to interest people for one's cause. And there is no need in fighting over the 10% that everybody has when there are 80% people who are still not committed in any way. And that is our challenge, to try and make sure that there is some kind of a stability developing, although one has to say, and I think that is largely investigated at the Moses Mendelssohn Center, that the Jewish community will go through a great shrinking process and that only larger centers will survive. So whatever happens, the Jewish community in Germany will diminish again. But whether it will diminish into 5 or 6 strong centers of Jewish life, or whether it will just evaporate, and we had some kind of like with the flowers, before they die, they have this last blossoming. Whether that is what we are looking ahead, that's still in our hands, and that's why I am trying to get a practical approach and try to interest as many people as possible in whatever kind of Judaism they may find interesting. The Abraham Geiger College is only for Reform rabbis, although of the European mold, which is sort of left-wing conservative, and we will also add a conservative rabbinical seminary, the Zacharias Frankel School, in autumn. So it will be for the two non-Orthodox denominations. No, one can also decide during the studies, but that's unique in the world. I think everywhere else you need to make your mind up before. But because the German situation is that if you start rabbinical training, you may actually not be socialized in a particular movement. I think it is fair to say that in the German context, it's preferable if people make the decision earlier or closer to their ordination, because the structure in Germany is so unstable in contrast to America, for example.
Yeah. Okay. These 15%, we were really surprised. We get a response that 50% do not miss anything. I think this is could be just if we try to interpret this huge percentage of it couldn't be if the situation a lot of immigrants come and there is almost no knowledge and no, we don't miss anything. I think that could be the problem on both sides. On one side, that the Central Council of Jews in Germany, or the established organizations, have not yet been able to reach all the Jews in Germany to show them, look here, there is an adult, there's an educational center for Jewish adults, or Jüdische Volkshochschule, or just some seminars on Hebrew or some seminars on Israel. A lot of offers also in smaller towns, yeah. And so, if 50% of the Jewish population is more or less disconnected from the Jewish community, that would be more or less congruent with this number. The second thing is, in the questionnaire we had not explicitly questions to young people what they will be attracted from or just to motivate it to come back to, or just to visit some kinds of Jewish institutions. But we had, I think, about 25 expert interviews, including also students who created student centers in university towns, and some younger representatives, also members of the board of Jewish community in Frankfurt, for example. And they said they rather think attractive for young Jews in Germany now, if they are interested in Jewish education, it is more or less Israel as a topic, and Jewish history and religion from a more intellectual approach. That what, and of course leisure time, some kinds of culture, and so the Jewish community in Düsseldorf, for example, they get money from the American Joint Distribution Committee, and they gave a half position for a young lady. The job is called event manager. That's her job in the Jewish community and in the religious Jewish community as an event manager for Düsseldorf and the whole area has in North Rhine-Westphalia has a couple of greater communities, and she tries by her own to make some parties and to make some excursions, some travels, and also some seminaries. So this is a kind of it's trial and error. And I forgot the third question was what? Yeah, I think it's. I can only estimate it just now. I think it's 1/4. There's a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Jim, I'd like to get down to something very basic. Now, the basic difference between Germany and the rest of, say, Europe or the world is that all of a sudden they discovered in Germany basically 200,000 potential new Jews which were not available before. In other words, 200,000 people came, they were not available for Jewish exposure. Having said that, in my mind, there is no difference insofar as the future of the Jewish community between Germany or any other country where there are Jews. The secret to success is very simple: to ensure that we pass on our religion. Now, I agree with the Professor. I'm not saying how much religion, but the cornerstone, the only basis for our survival throughout the generations is our religion. Things must be cultural Jews in it. This kind of Jew, that kind of Jew, that all helps, but it doesn't last. We had all sorts of movements. We had Bundists, we had communists, we had socialists. They thought this was the salvation. The only way to continue as Jews, irrespective of where, is for the leadership of each country to maximize effort to maintain and perpetuate our religion. All the rest is commentary. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm accepting donations after the session.
I just want to shortly respond on that. I agree with you, but I want to ask you one question back. If you know a lot of people, Jewish people, inside or outside of the Jewish communities, and you know they are not religious at all, so you have to develop a strategy what could be attractive for them just to hold them networked. And in case of the Russian, for example, it is music and culture and literature. And there is a fight in some of the local Jewish communities, a real fight in the boards, is a local literature club or a theater group, what the people really love. The Russian Jews love it, and they want to organize it under the roof of a religious Jewish community. So they have to answer, some of the communities have to answer this question by themselves. But for example, also these kind of cultural associations. 90% is culture what they do, but they are full, they are overcrowded with Russian immigrants. So the leaders of these Jewish cultural associations, they say this is for the time being an option, an alternative to hold in contact with them instead of losing them completely right now.
I agree, that is for the present generation, but you can't pass on your Judaism by being a cultural or an educated person, because you've got to guarantee your children.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. That is that you're absolutely right. One way of keeping people together to use the opportunity to instill the spirit of our religion, which has been our salvation for 3,000-4,000 years. Nothing else.
You see, during the whole conference, there was this kind of a question in the room here in the auditorium. Can you find a bridge between the religious interests and the cultural interests? And very often I hear, yeah, religion isn't doing it anymore. We need to push the culture. I don't see this so divided. I think one needs to, as you said, one needs to meet people where they are. And then one needs to see what one can develop. For example, one of the experiences we made was this musical interest. So we started a cantorial program because we figured that not many Russian younger people go into the rabbinate. That's a bit of a sort of a harsh change. But we found a great interest in the cantorial aspect, which is an educational as well as a musical one. So that found much more interest, and that has a religious undertone, obviously. The second interesting observation I made was that as soon as we ordained young Russian native speakers into the rabbinate, one of the most thrilling was a woman, young woman, Alina Dreiger, that she hit the world news. I mean, a Russian woman. We saw that that attracted Russian congregants. All of a sudden, that wasn't this old person with a beard. I mean, in Germany, we have rabbis still operating who are well over 80. I mean, I know that's no age, but you know, that is not a role model for a 15-year-old. All of a sudden, there was this very good-looking Russian rabbi, female rabbi. We worked on that, but that didn't work. But almost. But the synagogues were full, and not only for, you know, people suddenly thought, oh, you know, that's quite interesting, totally new edge. I didn't think that religion was so sexy. So I think one can lower the barrier, and one can actually get the religious message through, not always in the Orthodox mode. I mean, you know, there are some people who find that that's the real thing, but there are also some people who had their Marx and Lenin and Engels training who are a bit more interested in a different approach, a dialectical approach, call it that way, who are also appreciating Haskalah and this. But it is, I mean, you need to catch them a little bit with, you know, with some incentives. We know this from the business world, yeah? A freebie.
I think that we need to close this session, and we'd like to thank both speakers, and this discussion, of course, is going to continue. There's a lot to say about it, and thank you very much, both of you. Thank you.